What's the most cold-blooded breakup move you've ever witnessed or experienced? I remember the exact second my world collapsed under the fluorescent glow of that restaurant's gaudy chandelier. It cast bizarre shadows over the polished floor, and in the reflection, I saw the moment I handed over the small velvet box, fully expecting a tearful smile and a soft yes. Instead, Amber dropped a ring of her own into my open palm, the glimmering band I had given her. Months earlier, the one she claimed she'd treasure forever, was now a cold, mocking circle of gold. Everyone else around us froze. Her voice, low but unwavering, cut through the low hum of chatter. "I'm done, Daniel," she said. "I can't do this anymore." My stomach churned as if I'd been shoved off a cliff. We were supposed to be celebrating. I had gathered close friends to witness my heartfelt proposal. The ring I was holding out was meant to seal our future, but Amber's ring, returned so decisively, so cruelly, was more than a rejection. It was a demolition of months, maybe years, of plans and hope. I heard gasps from the surrounding tables. Some of the braver onlookers whispered, in confusion, leaning forward to catch fragments of our conversation. I couldn't quite grasp how quickly everything spiraled. One minute, I was convinced this was the happiest day of my life, and the next, I stood there, humiliated and speechless, fighting the urge to vomit. She didn't cry. She didn't even look sad. Her eyes were detached, her lips pressed into a slight curve that I used to interpret as concentration. Now, it looked like thinly veiled contempt. She took a step back, letting the hush of the room envelop us, then turned on her heel and strode toward the exit. The hush broke into frantic murmurs the moment she was gone, and my best friend Zach reached for my shoulder. "Dude," he mumbled, clearly torn between shock and pity. "What just happened?" I didn't answer him. I couldn't. My head was a roaring ocean of disbelief, and I could still feel the tiny circle of metal Amber had placed into my hand, so final and cold. It felt like someone had pressed the pause button on my existence. Was it possible that I had loved a phantom all along? Did I ever really know Amber? My memory flickered back to how we met, how we were so drawn to each other, how she seemed so perfect it was almost unreal. Well, maybe it was unreal from the start, I thought, rubbing my forehead with a clammy hand. The conversation, the ring, the meltdown, everything was happening so fast. But if I rewind just a few months, I might be able to piece together when the dream began to unravel. I might understand how I ended up in that neon-lit battleground, ring in hand, hope dissolving before a crowd of spectators hungry for drama. It was 6 months ago when I first crossed paths with Amber. I was on the phone, pacing outside a dog shelter, trying to adopt a rescue puppy that my landlady had finally agreed I could keep. The timing was awful. I had big projects at work, no time to breathe, and a raging headache from my sister's constant calls about some upcoming family gathering. I was so distracted that I nearly crashed into a woman hurrying out the door, a stack of adoption forms fluttering in her arms. Her eyes were sharp and bright, and she wore a navy sweater that looked impossibly soft under the midday sun. She shot me a playful grin as she balanced the paperwork, muttering something about disorganized staff members who couldn't find her application. Despite her frustration, her voice was cheerful, carrying a tone of easy confidence. I apologized for almost knocking her down, and asked if she'd had better luck adopting a puppy than I had. She raised an eyebrow. "You too? This place is a madhouse, but I've got my heart set on a golden retriever mix named Chili. They say I can pick him up next week if everything checks out." That was it, the conversation that sparked the rest of my life. We compared adoption stories, laughed about the incompetent staff, discovered that we both had some weird fascination with old Western films, and parted ways that day as near strangers who were oddly comfortable with each other. When she passed me her phone number, saying she was looking forward to a puppy playdate, I had this strange tingling sense that maybe, just maybe, fate was intervening. I reached out to her a couple of days later, once I had my new pup Milo at home. As luck would have it, she had already brought Chili to her apartment on a trial basis. Our first official meetup turned into a day-long adventure through the city's biggest park. The dogs tumbled in the grass, while Amber and I fell into easy conversation. She was witty, well-read, and exuded a self-assuredness I'd never seen in anyone before. We ended up sitting on a bench as the sun dipped low, talking about everything from our favorite authors to the little quirks we had, like my mild obsession with coffee roasters and her fear of umbrella spokes. She giggled when she admitted it, then pressed her lips together in mock seriousness. "Don't judge me, but umbrellas freak me out. It's the metal parts. I'm always convinced I'll poke someone's eye out." I couldn't help but laugh. The moment felt so genuine, so human, that I instantly let my guard down around her. Normally, I was cautious with new people. I had an ex who cheated on me after a 2-year relationship. That fiasco had turned me guarded, even a bit paranoid. But with Amber, from day one, I felt at peace. It was as though we instantly recognized pieces of ourselves in the other person. We continued seeing each other, and each day my infatuation grew. If anyone had asked, "Daniel, is this the real thing?" I would have said yes without a second thought. Every corner of my life began reflecting her presence. From the silly coffee mugs she bought, for me, to the half-finished puzzle on my kitchen table that she insisted we do together. She had this uncanny ability to inject color into the ordinary. When I introduced her to Zach, the friend who had stood by me since college, he seemed taken aback by how quickly things were moving. "Man, I'm happy for you," he admitted. "Just watch your step. You're letting her in real fast." I shrugged it off. "I'm telling you, she's different," I said, brimming with excitement. "She's the kind of person I can imagine traveling the world with, or building a home with." Amber seemed equally smitten. At least, I believed that she was. She always asked about my day, texting me good night with sweet, personal jokes that made me chuckle in bed. She joined me at family dinners, expertly navigating my sister's pointed questions about future plans. She even volunteered to host a small gathering for me at her apartment, a place that was tastefully furnished with abstract art pieces and plush rugs. She made everyone feel welcome, skillfully complimenting each person there with a sincerity that left them grinning. Later, I found out that sincerity was as thin as tissue paper. A few weeks into our romance, small inconsistencies began to peek out. She would sometimes talk about events that made no sense, or mention mutual friends I'd never heard of, only to shrug them off with a dismissive giggle when I asked for details. She'd suddenly pivot from intense emotional closeness to distant aloofness. Once, we were cuddling on her sofa, halfway through a movie, when her phone buzzed. She checked it and abruptly ended our evening, saying she had a family emergency. Concerned, I offered to help, but she brushed me off. The next morning, she texted me a photo of an old black and white movie poster, claiming she was at some vintage cinema. No mention of any emergency. When I pressed her, she said it was all resolved quickly and that her family didn't want her to worry. My gut twisted a bit, but I forced myself to believe her. She was so charming, so earnest when she spoke. Things between us kept escalating, though. She introduced me to more of her social circle, people I barely got to know, usually, in fleeting gatherings that ended with me paying the bill more often than not. It was never a big deal at first, but after the 4th or 5th time, I started to notice how quickly she'd pass the check my way while leaning in for a kiss, distracting me from any hesitation. Then she'd flash that bright smile and suggest we split the cost next time. Except next time never came. When Zach commented on it saying, "Dude, she sure likes letting you pay for stuff," I shrugged. "She's not working right now," I justified. She said her job was on hiatus because of some complicated restructuring. She didn't appear lazy about it either. She had all these elaborate plans for a future business venture. She'd talk passionately about opening a boutique for artisanal dog treats or launching an influencer platform for pet owners. On paper, it sounded legit. In reality, though, I started to sense that something was off. She'd drop references to prior relationships that ended because they couldn't handle her drive. Then she'd call me perfect, praising my stable job, my empathy, my capacity to understand her. I soaked it up. Who wouldn't want to be seen as perfect by the person they adore? My mother met her once and was enthralled by her kindness. But after a couple of dinners, she gently cautioned me. "Danny, sweetie, I know I shouldn't meddle, but does she have a stable life?" She's always polite, but I've heard her say some odd things that contradict each other. I, of course, defended Amber. That was my default stance. Loyalty. Even as small red flags waved, I told myself that relationships require tolerance. Maybe she was just more impulsive than most. Maybe I was overanalyzing. But the puzzle pieces continued to shift. One evening, she convinced me to help her apply for a business loan, in her name, saying it would be our project for the future. The bank needed proof of stable income, so I co-signed certain documents. Alarm bells rang in my head, but I muffled them. We were going to get married someday, right? Why not take the leap? This felt like some test of love or an invitation into her deeper trust. Amber's promises of a bright future were mesmerizing. She'd talk about traveling to Bali with me once her business took off, about buying a little cottage near the beach so our dogs could run free. She painted pictures of a shared life so vivid I could almost touch them. It was at that point I realized how deeply I'd fallen under her spell. She was everything. My confidant, my partner in crime, my sweet, sultry muse. Behind the curtain, though, the small lies piled up. She was cagey about her phone, flipping it face down whenever we were together. She'd refer to her father as alive one day, and then mention he passed away years ago the next. It made no sense. When I asked about these contradictions, she'd change the subject or spark an argument that ended with me apologizing for prying into her personal issues. Over time, I noticed how she'd lash out in subtle ways. If I stayed out too late with Zach, she'd sulk and accuse me of neglecting her. If I forgot to call her during my lunch break, she'd punish me with a silent treatment that could last days, only to reappear with affectionate messages. Once I was practically begging for her attention. It was an exhausting roller coaster, but I kept climbing back into the seat, thinking the exhilarating highs were worth the stomach-churning lows. The first time I sensed I might truly lose her was after a heated argument over finances. I'd just learned that she'd taken out an additional line of credit under her name, but used my information as a reference. I confronted her, gently at first, and she exploded. She accused me of not trusting her enough, claiming that if we were a real couple, we should have no secrets. I tried to tell her that trust is built, not demanded, but she slammed the door in my face. That night, I slept in my own apartment, anxious and unable to rest. My phone remained silent. In the morning, I found a single text. "I'm sorry. Let's talk." We met for coffee and she cried. No tears dropped, but her sobs sounded so convincing that I believed she was genuinely sorry. She swore she'd fix everything and asked me to stick with her, to be patient while she sorted out her finances. And once again, I relented. In retrospect, I realized how carefully orchestrated her emotional outbursts were. Each meltdown was timed to coincide with me voicing a legitimate concern or boundary. Whenever I tried to hold her accountable, she morphed into a vulnerable victim, and I returned to my role as her savior, her rock. Soon, discussions about moving in together came up. She proposed it casually, maybe a little too casually, while we were browsing lamps in a home decor store. "Wouldn't it be great if we had a place of our own?" she asked, sliding her arm through mine. I felt a warm glow in my chest at the idea. She talked about saving money, splitting rent, combining our furniture. The illusions of stability lulled me into complacency. We found a quaint loft in a decent neighborhood, near a dog park. I was thrilled, despite the nagging voice in my head that pointed out all the times she'd manipulated. This was progress, right? Committing to a shared lease was the next step toward that horizon of traveling, that beach cottage, that happily ever after. It was only a few days before the lease signing that I finally stumbled onto something undeniable. While tidying up the bedroom in her apartment, I bumped into an old, half-opened shoebox tucked under the bed. I would have ignored it if a stack of folded receipts hadn't fallen out. They weren't just from recent purchases. Some were from years ago, made in different states. Hotel stays, dinners at upscale restaurants, flights to random places, all under a name that wasn't Amber. The address lines were scribbled out, but I could still read a partial name, Amanda King. The same surname Amber once claimed to be hers. My blood ran cold. The realization that she might have changed her name or was using multiple identities rattled me. I started to question every story she'd ever told me. My immediate reaction was disbelief. Maybe there was an innocent explanation, but how could there be? The secrecy, the weird slip-ups about her father's status, the business, loan. Everything started weaving together in a tapestry of deception. I approached her that evening, telling myself I'd remain calm. She was slicing tomatoes in the kitchen when I mentioned the shoebox. In a flash, her expression shifted from domestic serenity to razor-sharp anger. She demanded to know why I was snooping through her belongings. I told her it was an accident. She grew red in the face, slamming the knife down. For a moment, I thought she might actually throw it at. "I have a past, Daniel." "So what? Is that illegal now?" she snarled. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I'm not accusing you of anything, but I need to understand who you are. Why do those receipts have a different name?" Her eyes narrowed. "I dated someone who wanted me to change my name," she snapped. "I made a mistake, okay? I tried to be someone else for him. I left that life behind." She glared at me, daring me to contradict her. And in that instant, I caught a glimpse of someone unrecognizable. Her gentle facade cracked, revealing a woman whose empathy felt dangerously shallow. I wanted to press on, but she stormed into the bedroom, locked the door, and refused to talk further. For the next few days, she was distant but didn't threaten to end things. We tiptoed around each other, and I kept telling myself that maybe she had some traumatizing experiences that made her adopt different names. Maybe I should be more understanding. But the tension simmered, poisoning every interaction. Amid this chaos, the day of the lease signing arrived. Against my better judgment, I showed up at the realtor's office, half expecting Amber to cancel. But she was there in the lobby, dressed in a sharp blazer, smiling as though nothing had happened. She wrapped an arm around my waist and introduced herself to The realtor with the confidence of a seasoned negotiator. "Let's do this," she whispered to me with a grin, and for a moment I let myself be swept away by her charm again. Maybe we just needed a fresh start. Maybe living together would let us address issues openly. The logic was flawed, but I was desperate for stability. Desperate to cling to the version of Amber I fell in love with. We signed the lease. 2 weeks later, we moved our belongings into the first few days felt almost honeymoon-like. She baked cookies, played music while we unpacked, hung curtains. We made love on a mattress thrown on the floor before the bed frame was even assembled. For a fleeting period, I convinced myself that we'd turned a corner. But normalcy never lasted with Amber. One evening, I found her hunched over my laptop, which I'd left open. She was scrolling through my bank account. When she noticed me, she acted nonchalant. "You never told me your savings were so high," she said with a slight, accusatory tone, as if it were a betrayal that I hadn't shared every detail of my finances with her yet. I bristled. "This is personal. Why are you going through my bank statements?" She pouted. "We live together, Daniel. We should be sharing everything." Then her tone softened, and she wrapped her arms around my shoulders. "It's not about the money. It's about trust. Don't you trust me?" In that moment, I felt a queasy mixture of guilt and suspicion. She had a knack for flipping the script, making me the bad guy for wanting basic privacy. We never resolved that conversation, and over the next few weeks, I noticed funds missing from my account. At first, I thought it was an error or some recurring bill I'd forgotten about. But as the amounts grew, I started to suspect she was siphoning money. I knew I had to confront her again. That confrontation never happened the way I planned, because right before I could address it, she pivoted once more, telling me how much she wanted to spend her life with, how we should think about taking the next step and getting engaged. As if on cue, she paraded me in front of her friends. Most of them new. To me, people I barely recognized, and boasted about our perfect relationship. By the time it all came to a head, I was so thoroughly entangled in her web that I believed the only way to fix our issues was to propose formally. I told Zach about my plan. He tried to talk me out of it, or at least to slow down. But I was head over heels in love with the idea of what we could be, not necessarily with the reality we were living. So I planned a special evening at a fancy restaurant, inviting a handful of my friends, Zach included, and Amber's acquaintances to witness the big moment. I thought if I displayed my unwavering commitment, maybe the cracks in our foundation would magically seal. I'd bend. I'd yield. But she'd see how serious I was about our future. That's how I ended up in that glaring chandelier light, kneeling, heart pounding, as she said, "I'm done." She didn't say no. She said she was done, as if it was all just a game she no longer cared to play. No tears, no apologies, just a quiet finality in her voice. She placed the ring I'd once given her back into my hand, flipping the script on my entire plan. She left me standing there, surrounded by gasps and the uncomfortable shift of chairs. I felt nauseous, barely able to register the concerned faces of those who had come to celebrate our engagement. Looking down at the ring, I realized how many illusions I had nurtured. The restaurant's manager offered me a glass of water. Zach led me out to the curb, where the cool night air pressed in. I guess it was shock or heartbreak or both, but I couldn't even cry. I was just empty. In the days following that disaster, Amber effectively disappeared. She blocked me on social media, never returned to the loft, and refused to answer her phone. She left behind a chaotic trail of half-finished illusions. Bills in my name, evidence of her forging my signature on credit forms. My bank account was lighter too. I reached out to mutual contacts. Most of them turned out to be superficial acquaintances. A few felt sorry for me but had their own messy stories about how Amber used them for one thing or another. One of them mentioned that Amber often talked about getting what she deserved, as if she was owed the world for some past wrong. When I finally got hold of her best friend, or at least someone she referred to as her best friend, the woman told me that Amber had a habit of reinventing herself for every new relationship. She used a different name in college, ran off with a wealthy older guy and left him bankrupt. Then, she apparently tried the same with a tech entrepreneur. Each time, once she'd drained whatever resources she could, she'd ghost them, leaving heartbreak and confusion in her wake. The more I learned, the sicker I felt. I was just the latest mark, a pit stop on her journey of manipulation. Every warm memory we shared became tainted by the suspicion that she'd been acting. The time she cried about her father's supposed death, the moment she cheered me on for a promotion, the nights we spent planning our dream future, it all suddenly felt staged. I considered taking legal action. I had enough proof of her forging my signature on loan applications. But she'd known exactly how to navigate that territory, leaving just enough ambiguity to make a case complicated and expensive. Lawyers warned me it might become a drawn-out process with no guaranteed outcome. Meanwhile, rent for the loft still needed to be paid. The landlord held me responsible since my name was on the lease. My credit card statements tallied up the dinner bills and purchases I'd made for her. Every single day was a new avalanche of stress. My only solace came from confiding in Zach, who helped me gather my scattered finances and reclaim a semblance of stability. I spent endless nights on the couch in the loft, half expecting her to show up with a twisted explanation or apology. She never did. The place smelled of her shampoo. Her perfume lingered on the sheets, and I hated myself for missing her presence, even though I knew she was toxic. Eventually, I packed up her belongings, what little she had left behind, and stored them in boxes. She never came back for them. Late at night, I sometimes found myself rereading old texts or scrolling through pictures of us looking happy. The confusion tore at me. How could someone who seemed so genuine, so connected, turn out to be this cold-blooded? I sank into depression. Work became a distant priority. My performance slumped, and my boss threatened to demote me. I couldn't focus on anything but the hole in my chest. My dog Milo whimpered at my low energy, missing the days we'd go on long walks with Amber and Chili. The landlord eventually let me break the lease, acknowledging the extenuating circumstances, and I moved back into my old, smaller apartment with a sense of defeat. Months passed, and I heard rumors that Amber had relocated to another state, possibly with a new partner. Some said she was traveling abroad, living off someone's generosity. Whether it was out of heartbreak or leftover loyalty, a part of me hoped she'd find some healing, that maybe this cycle of deception came from a pain she could mend. Another part of me felt a boiling anger, wanting her to face the consequences of her actions. But mostly, I just felt empty. Little by little, with Zach's help, I started rebuilding my life. I cut down on expenses, reached payment agreements with the credit card companies, and sold a few valuables to recoup some of my losses. It was humiliating, but also a much-needed wake-up. I'd allowed my idealism and desperation for love to cloud my judgment, ignoring all those warning signs. I tried therapy for a while. The sessions helped me see that I'd been ignoring my own boundaries and red flags in the name of unconditional love. I learned that love shouldn't require ignoring blatant inconsistencies or letting someone trample over your trust. Over a year later, I'm still piecing everything together. Some days, I question whether I'll ever fully trust again. Other days, I feel proud of having survived an emotional war zone. More discerning about the illusions people present. My finances are on the mend, my credit is slowly recovering, and Milo is still here, wagging his tail when I come home each evening. Sometimes I'll pass that fancy restaurant downtown, and a surge of anxiety grips me. I still remember the hush as Amber placed that ring in my palm, the metallic chill of it sinking into my skin. But I also remember that I'm free of her manipulations. I survived. I don't know where Amber is now, what name she might be using, or who her next target is. Maybe she'll never stop. Maybe someday she'll face a reckoning. All I know is that I witnessed, firsthand, the most cold-blooded breakup I could have imagined. One that began with promises of forever and ended with a single, devastating sentence. I'm done. I may never get closure from her, but I've found closure within myself. I was conned by someone who saw love as a transaction. In time, I learned to forgive myself for falling under her spell. That's my story, the brutal truth of how swiftly an illusion can become a nightmare. My only hope is that sharing this cautionary tale keeps at least one other's person from stumbling down the same rabbit hole I did. In the fallout that followed, I clung to a sliver of hope that maybe Amber would come back and explain everything, revealing some traumatic reason behind her actions. I clung to that hope for weeks.